Coming up on today's edition of the Locked On Raiders podcast, who was the last Raider to have 6 or more interceptions in a season? You'll get the answer to that, plus a whole lot more coming up on today's edition of the Locked On Raiders podcast, Monday, June 5th, 2023.
Just win. Just win. Just win. Just win.
The autumn wind is a raider, pillaging just for fun. He'll knock you round and upside down and laugh when he's conquered and won. And won. And won. And won. And won.
And welcome here, Raider Nation, to another edition of the Locked On Raiders podcast. Thank you so much for making the show your first listen of the day. Make sure you subscribe or follow for free on YouTube or wherever you get your podcast to get the latest edition of the show as soon as it becomes available. Of course, if you're checking us out on YouTube, it's because of my man Ari. We definitely appreciate him. You can check him out on Twitter at Ari Produces. If you're checking us out on YouTube, we appreciate you as well because, again, this YouTube thing, we're kind of new to it here on the Locked On Raiders podcast, but it's been growing. It's been a really good experience. And, again, my man Ari's been doing a whole lot of work behind the scenes and making sure it all goes each and every day. So we definitely appreciate him. Again, hit him up on Twitter at Ari Produces. You can hit me up on Twitter as well at your boy Q254. You want to get something in on the show, it's all good. And of course, the Locked On Raider podcast voicemail line is 707-654-4693. Your calls and texts are coming up in segment number 3. Segment number 2, we're going to talk about the last Raider to have 6 or more interceptions in a regular season. And I think that the answer, if you don't already know it, will surprise you in a major way. But we'll talk about that coming up in segment number 2. Here in segment number 1, I'd like to do news and notes of the day. And look, the reality of it is it's June 5th. So there's not a whole lot of news and notes going along around the NFL. But one thing I can tell you about is today at the Intermountain Healthcare Performance Center is Raiders Media Day. So that's basically like the first day of school, right? You go and get your school clothes. You go and get your haircut. You go get your new shoes, right? You're all fancy. You're ready to go. And then you go take your picture. Well, this is the same thing, but on a whole nother level, right? So JT the Brick, Eric Allen, and myself will be set up inside the Intermountain Healthcare Performance Center, the indoor facility, and we'll be able to meet and greet with the players, with the coaches, hopefully with GM Dave Ziegler as well. Would love to have a few minutes to be able to talk with him. It's always great. We catch up with them. And if you remember last year at Media Day, it's the first time that Devontae Adams actually put on the full uniform. That's when they had that moment where Derek Carr came running out. I was like, man, it's great to see you in that uniform. They had a big hug, and you can see how fired up Devontae was just to be in that Raiders uniform. So all the free agents that the Raiders brought in the offseason, all the rookies that they brought in over the season, or the offseason, they will all have the opportunity to put on the uniform, the full thing, pads, everything, for the first time. So that's going to happen today at the Intermountain Healthcare Performance Center. And it starts early. We'll be there at about 7 o'clock this morning, so depending on what time you're listening to it, it may already have got started, or if you're listening to it late in the day, it might already be over. But it starts at around 7 a.m., and it should wrap up around 11:30, 11:45, and whatever I'm able to get from that, whoever I talk to, if it's the GM, if it's the coach, if it's players, whoever that is, we'll definitely have plenty to bring to the show here tomorrow on the Locked On Raiders podcast. So that's going to be a lot of fun. Excited to be a part of this one. Last year, I was a part of it, but I wasn't a part of it to this extent. Last year, I remember being in the upstairs in the podcast studio where I interviewed Matt Millen last week. I was in that podcast studio, and I actually did my radio show from there, and I remember talking to Trayvon Merrick. And I think there was one other player that came up to the studio that I was able to talk to, but this time we're actually going to be in the indoor facility, and we're going to just be able to kind of see how everything goes down, right? Kind of see how the sausage is made. And so that's going to be a lot of fun, and like I said, whatever I'm able to bring back to the show, I'll definitely do. Now, I did want to bring up one thing that's been floating around Twitter for a while, and I don't know if you've been paying attention to it or not, and I'm not trying to fuel any more trade speculation or rumors or whatever, but Hunter Renfrow jerseys are currently on sale at Raider Image. So take that for what it's worth. I know everyone always, gets up in arms when they see that a jersey's on sale because they know that usually means something, right? It means that they're either changing numbers. Maybe it means that player's on his way out. Of course, there's been a lot of speculation on if Hunter Renfrow is going to be around for the 2023 season. In my gut, I feel like he's going to be around this season. I've said it multiple times that there's a world where him and Trey Tucker do coexist. But that wide receiver room is really, really deep. So just a little note that I saw, like I said, saw it floating around Twitter that Hunter Renfrow jerseys are currently on sale at the Raider Image. So, again, kind of take that for what it's worth. Final note I have for you for segment number 1 of today's Locked On Raiders podcast, little news and notes of the day. It doesn't have anything to do with the Raiders, but it does have to do with the player that I think a lot of Raider Nation was excited about when he was coming out in the draft, and that's Ed Oliver. Ed Oliver, the big defensive lineman from Houston, the University of Houston, went number 9 overall in the draft in 2019. He signed a contract extension over the weekend, 4 years, $68 million deal with $45 million guarantee. And I know you're asking, well, why does that matter? Why does that matter to the Locked On Raiders podcast? Well, again, that's a player that I believe a lot of Raider Nation was looking at and wanted the Raiders to draft in 2019. And if you remember, they drafted Cleve Farrell, number 4 overall. I was in the category of wanting Quinnen Williams so bad. I wanted them to grab Quinnen Williams, but he went one pick before they can get him to the New York Jets, and he's currently trying to get a contract extension. And look, Ed Oliver has not just killed it. Like, he didn't just come into the NFL and just tear it up like everyone expected him to do. He was a monster at the University of Houston. He hasn't really been that guy so far in his career. 14.5 sacks, 42 quarterback hits, 4 forced fumbles, and 151 tackles, again, through 4 seasons. In comparison, Cleve Farrell had 10 career sacks with the Raiders, and 4.5 came in his rookie year. So, I mean, again, Ed Oliver's not killing it, but he did just get a contract extension for the Buffalo Bills, so at least they like what he's bringing to the table. And, again, he was a player that if they weren't going to get Quinnen Williams, if they weren't going to get Devin White, because that was another guy that I was hoping that they would have an opportunity to go get, the linebacker who went to Tampa Bay, one pick after the Raiders picked Cleve Farrell, then I was looking at a guy like Ed Oliver just because I thought he brought a lot of juice to that defensive line. Again, he's not Aaron Donald, so let's not make any mistake about that. But you see a guy from the 2019 draft when the Raiders had 3 first-round picks. Another guy from that draft is getting a contract extension, not on the silver and black. Cleve Farrell, he's now in San Francisco. Josh Jacobs, 2019 draft, he's got the franchise tag. He still has to hold on to, or he still has to sign that. He's holding it right now, but he has to sign that before he can, play this year. Maybe he'll get a long-term deal, or maybe it's just a 1-year franchise tag deal done and then call it a day. And maybe he hits free agency next year. And then Jonathan Abram, he's already gone from the Raiders to the Packers to the Seahawks. Now he's on the New Orleans Saints. He's teammates again with Derek Carr. So there you go. So the Raiders had 3 cracks at it in 2019, and it didn't go too well outside of Josh Jacobs. But there's a player right there in Ed Oliver who signed a contract extension over the weekend. So that's all I got for you for segment number 1 of today's Locked On Raiders podcast, kind of news and notes, really scattershooting across the NFL. Coming up in segment number 2, who was the last Raider to have 6+ interceptions in a regular season? I'll give you that answer and talk about it next on the Locked On Raiders podcast after I tell you about the title sponsor, which is FanDuel. And right now, it's a great time to make a fast break to FanDuel during the NBA Finals. The NBA Finals are a lot of fun. The NHL Stanley Cup Finals, a lot of fun. You can get player prop bets. You can do same-game parlays. You can do over-unders. You can do whatever you want there at FanDuel, but they've got you covered with whatever sport it is. Again, NBA, NHL, and Major League Baseball, they've got it all covered. And right now, new customers get a no-sweat first bet up to $2,500. That's right, $2,500 back in bonus bets if your first bet doesn't win. So, again, no better place to bet on all your finals action than America's #1 sportsbook. Again, visit FanDuel.com/LockedOn. Get a no-sweat first bet up to $2,500. That's FanDuel.com/LockedOn. FanDuel, the official sports betting partner of the NBA. All right, Raider Nation, here we go. Segment number 2 of today's Locked On Raiders podcast. Saw this nugget floating around Twitter. It's crazy how this even popped up, talking about every team's last 6+ interception player. This came by way of 33rdteam.com. I've said it multiple times that they do a really good job. And the crazy thing about this is on Saturday, I was doing a radio show, ESPN National, and I was on with former Raider linebacker Kirk Morrison. We had a really good show. It was great to catch up with Captain Kirk. Been friends with him for a very long time. Me and Kirk Morrison actually met, and I've shared this story with him multiple times, but it's so funny. We actually met for the first time at Lamont Jordan. Remember Lamont Jordan when he was the running back for the Silver and Black? He was turning 30, and we met at his birthday party in San Francisco, and it was, we just been friends ever since then. And I couldn't tell you how old Lamont Jordan is right now. I couldn't tell you how many years ago that was, but I know it was a long time. So long story short, me and Kirk were doing this show on Saturday on ESPN National Radio. It's a lot of fun. It's called Primetime. So we were just talking about whatever, football, basketball, hockey. I mean, we talked about everything. Again, it was ESPN National Radio. And then this little nugget from 33rdteam.com came floating across my timeline on Twitter, and it's just wild how things happen. And it's called every team's last 6+ interception player. So when you think about that, just off top, unless you've already Googled it and looked it up, just what would you think? Give me one name who you thought would have been the last player for the Raiders to have 6+ interceptions. I'll tell you who I thought before I actually looked at the graphic and found out who it was. I thought Charles Woodson. Nope, wasn't him. I thought Reggie Nelson. Nope, wasn't him. C. Wood had 5 with the Raiders. Reggie Nelson had 5, but they're never more than 5. Right? And I was thinking, well, who could it have been? So when I looked at the graphic and broke it down, and like I said, it had all 32 teams on it, unbelievable. Thomas Howard. The linebacker, Thomas Howard. And again, it goes back to the story about me being on the radio with Kirk Morrison, because that was the duo right there. Remember, that was the law firm, Howard and Morrison, Morrison and Howard, whatever you want to call it. But think about that. Linebacker Thomas Howard was the last Raider to have 6+ interceptions in a season, and that was in 2007. Yeah, I'm going to take my time on that. 2007. Raider Nation is 2023. And they have never had a guy outside of Thomas Howard have 6 or more interceptions in a season. And I go back and I tie this all together by saying that was the reason why I was very adamant about the Raiders going out and getting a guy who's a ball hawk, going out and getting a guy that's used to getting his hands on the ball, a guy that's looking to create turnovers, like an Emmanuel Forbes, right, who went to the Commanders, I think, 17 overall, which was very high. I didn't think he was going to go that high, but he did. So that was why I was so adamant about them getting a guy like that, because they have not had that dude since 2007, and he's not even a corner. Thomas Howard wasn't a corner. He wasn't a safety. He was a linebacker. The last guy to have 6+ interceptions was a linebacker, right? And, of course, Thomas Howard, rest in peace, he passed away. So, I didn't even have the heart to pass this nugget along while I was on the radio with Kirk, because I know how close they were. And I know that, anytime I talk to him and we bring up and talk about Thomas Howard, that was his really close friend. So I didn't want to even bring it up on the radio on Saturday. But it was just wild to think that, I'm on the radio with the guy who created a bunch of turnovers in Kirk Morrison, and then the guy that last led the Raiders with 6+ interceptions was his running buddy in Thomas Howard back in 2007. So I don't know what this Raiders defense is going to look like in 2023. I really don't. We know that they brought in a lot of guys by way of free agency. We know they signed or drafted 6 out of 9 guys were on the defensive side of things. Aiden O'Connell, he's the 4th-round quarterback. Jacorian Bennett, the corner out of Maryland, he's a guy that's had ball production. Chris Smith, the safety out of Georgia, he's had ball production. At some point, they've got to find a way to get their hands on the ball. I mean, it's been since 2007. Look, think about this. I'm talking about 6+ interceptions for one player. The Raiders only had 6 interceptions in 2022 as a team. So that's why I don't know what the defense is going to look like. I don't know how much better it's going to be, but a great start to turning that defense around is creating some turnovers. And I know that turnovers come in many different ways. It could be strip sacks, there could be fumbles, there could be, you could do the peanut punch, you could not, whatever. There's plenty of ways to get the ball back for your team, but they've got to find guys. They've got to have dudes that can get their hands on the ball. They've got to get in the habit of bringing those kind of guys to the organization. That is just way too long. Like, I'm looking at some of these, like the Arizona Cardinals, the last person to have 6+ interceptions, Patrick Peterson in 2012. How about, the Baltimore Ravens, Eric Weddle in 2017. Let's see. How about Reggie Nelson? That was when he was with the Bengals in 2015. How about another guy that might have played for the Raiders? Oh, Casey Hayward with the Green Bay Packers in 2012. Casey Hayward again with the Chargers in 2016. Oh, you want to be recent? Okay. C.J. Gardner-Johnson last season with the Eagles. Minka Fitzpatrick last season with the Steelers. Tariq Woolen, a rookie last year with the Seahawks. Right? I mean, so it's not something that doesn't happen all the time. It just doesn't happen all the time for the Raiders. Xavier Howard, 2020 with the Dolphins. 6+ interceptions. Like, the Raiders haven't had it since 2007. And as I'm looking at this graphic, I think they were the longest. Oh no, Ray Buchanan with the Colts, 1994. Sheesh. Well, that's really a long time, right? 2007 is a long time, but man, Ray Buchanan with the Colts in 1994. That's really long. You don't want to be that long, right? You don't want to go that long without having 6+ interceptions. At some point, the Raiders have got to find a way to create turnovers. And I really don't care if it's one guy getting a bunch, but they've got to get their hands on the ball. That is ridiculous that it's been that long since they had somebody do that. So one of Patrick Graham's big jobs in 2023 is to get these guys trained up on getting interceptions. I talked about it quite a bit on Friday's show as well when I was talking about the tip drill and how the ball just fell to the ground. And then the next time the tip drill happened, Trayvon Merritt came up with the interception. That is just something that if I focus on one element of the defense, that's going to be that creating that turnovers. And I know the defensive line getting to the quarterback will help. That's fine. It all plays together. But at the same time, you've got to be able to make the play on the back end when it's there to be made. That's the thing about it. The Raiders don't make the play when it's there to be made. So they've got to do that. It just blew my mind when I saw that. Again, 33rdteam.com. Every team's last 6+ interception player for the Raiders, Thomas Howard in 2007. That's all I got for you. Segment number 2 of today's Locked On Raiders podcast. Coming up in segment number 3, your calls and texts. You're off that Locked On Raider podcast voicemail line, 707-654-4693. This is the Locked On Raiders podcast. Here we go, Raider Nation. Segment number 3 of today's Locked On Raiders podcast. Your calls and texts. You're off that Locked On Raider podcast voicemail line, 707-654-4693. Just have a few of them for you today as we start off this week. Let's go to JP from the 209. He's calling to respond to the question and answer I had from head coach Josh McDaniels about quarterback Aiden O'Connell. That was when we were at the media session on Thursday last week, and I asked him about Aiden O'Connell. JP thought about it, listened to the answer and the question, and has his response. Here he is, JP from the 209.
Yo, what's up, Q? It's your boy JP from the 209. Just really dissected that question that you asked Josh McDaniels for probably 20, 30 minutes right now. And call me crazy. Maybe I'm just looking at this through black and silver lenses. But, man, Josh McDaniels sounds like he found himself a gem with Aiden O'Connell. Now, hear me out. I think he wants Jimmy G to start still, and I think he's confident that he will start. Especially just the way he went about that question that Vinny asked him. But, man, does it sound like he's in love with Aiden O'Connell. And it just seems crazy, like, all of a sudden Tom Brady now is trying to be part owner, and they somehow land this, what was he, a 4th-round draft pick? Like, I don't know, just trying to connect the dots over here, and it just seems like he had his eye on this guy for a while now, and he knows exactly who he is, and I don't know. Maybe I'm just looking at it through silver and black glasses, but I think this guy's going to be something special, man. Calling it right now. But anyways, shout out Q, shout out your son for his birthday. Keep doing what you do, man. Peace out.
JP, thanks so much for the call, my man. I appreciate you. And look, I will not call you crazy. I will not say that you're looking at it from silver and black lenses, because when he answered that question to me about Aiden O'Connell, and then the whole media session was wrapped up, I went and started talking to Paul Gutierrez from ESPN, and I asked him, I said, he sounds like he's pretty high on Aiden O'Connell, right? And he's like, yeah, he's definitely pretty high on the 4th-round quarterback out of Purdue. I don't know if that means he's going to end up being the franchise quarterback or they believe he's going to be the franchise quarterback, but he's definitely pretty high on Aiden O'Connell. And then Paul brought up the question that I had asked Josh McDaniels at the owners meeting, which was before the draft, about the quarterbacks and the different styles of quarterbacks that were in the draft, and the fact that he had mentioned Aiden O'Connell as well. Now, he didn't gush over him or anything, but he did mention him. Matter of fact, here's that question and answer from the owners meetings back in March.
You've worked with multiple different styles of quarterbacks, and there's multiple different styles of quarterbacks in this upcoming draft. Is there any kind of preference that you have, or is it just...
No, I think honestly, like, you look for a guy who's, I always thought you got to be able to think, throw, lead, learn. And, if you can do those 4 things, that's a great place to start. You know what I mean? Because in the National Football League, like, those are the guys that, honestly, when you look at the last few games of our season every year, I mean, generally speaking, those guys are doing those things at a high level, and some of them at an elite level. And so, the other thing that I would say, Q, is that all these quarterbacks, and I've been evaluating them for quite a while now, they're all at different stages of the development. And so, Anthony's at a different place than Bryce, and Bryce is a different place than Will, and Will, is a different place than Hendon Hooker, and Hendon Hooker's a different place than CJ, and CJ's a different place than Hainer and O'Connell. And I mean, there's a lot of different guys. Some of them have played more football, some of them have played less. And the more they play and the more they grow and the more they develop, you might reach their ceiling, and their ceiling might be a different place than they're at now. Most of them are. And so some of this is you got to look at what you see, the traits that they have, and then you got to project them into your system with your development and say, where's this guy going to be 3 years from now? Because you're not drafting a player and saying, okay, we're happy with where he's at today. We think we're going to be happy with where he's going to be at 3 years from now because we feel like he has a chance to really survive and be a good player.
So there you go. So you hear he mentioned Aiden O'Connell at the end. Again, not saying that he was gushing over him or isolating him or anything. I mean, he mentioned all the quarterbacks, but he did bring him up. So clearly they were scouting him, and he was on their radar even at that point. So there you go. So, JP, I don't think you're crazy at all. I definitely think that he believes in Aiden O'Connell and wants to see what he could turn into. And, depending on the health of Jimmy G, he might see what Aiden O'Connell could turn into a little sooner rather than later. But thank you again for that call. I do appreciate you. Up next, got a text from Raider Jim. He says, hey, Q, it's Raider Jim here. With Brady's involvement in the Raiders, do you think that there's any chance he gets involved as a mentor to our quarterbacks? I can't think of a better mentor for O'Connell to learn Josh McDaniels' system than the GOAT. That's Raider Jim. And I would be lying to you if I told you that I had any idea. Right? I have no idea if Tom Brady has any interest in being any kind of mentor. The minority stock and sale of the team, the ownership to Tom Brady hasn't gone through yet. It's not all the way a done deal. Of course, it was agreed upon, but they still have to get the 24 votes from the owners, the other owners in the league, to sign off on it before they can make him official part owner of the Silver and Black. But I don't know. I honestly have no idea if he has any interest in that. I think he's got a lot of things going on. He's part owner of the Aces. Of course, he's spending a lot of time with his family as well. So I don't know. I mean, maybe. I wouldn't doubt that maybe Josh McDaniels says, hey, maybe give him a call and bounce some ideas off him. But as far as kind of taking him under his wing and really like mentoring him, really mentoring him, I probably doubt it. But again, like I said, I'd be BSing you if I told you that I knew for sure, because I absolutely do not. But thank you so much for that text. I do appreciate you. Up next, got a call from Raider Eddie in Denver. He's calling to talk about the Jimmy G news and why he's not getting worried about it. And actually, he thinks it could work out really well for the Raiders. Here he is, Raider Eddie in Denver.
Hey, Q, what's up? This is Raider Eddie in Denver. Love your show as always. Love the platform for conversations and debates. I have been critical of the new regime at times. When I sit back and I think about the news about Jimmy G, there is more risk than we initially anticipated. So if we were confident that he could play in 15 games this season, let's say, and that's just an estimate, a prediction. Well, maybe with the news about him failing the physical and having to get surgery after we signed him, maybe we put that prediction in. Maybe he'll play 13 games out of the 17. And so maybe that means that Hoyer, a combination of Hoyer and Aiden O'Connell, have to be available for maybe 4 games this season. I don't necessarily see that as the end of the world. It's all about risk, and it looks to be that the risk is greater than what we initially thought with Garoppolo, and it doesn't feel good, and it's easy to criticize. But I think it's still very likely that he starts the season and he plays a lot of the games. In the last 2 seasons, he's played 15 games and 11 games. So it's not like the guy misses every single game. I'm gonna guess he'll play 13 games this season. It's just a guess. Okay. But when I also look at the recent drafting, I think the defensive line is a lot better. I think the defensive backfield is a lot deeper. I think the offensive line is deeper. I think as a team we're younger. I think the wide receiving core is better. I think even the tight end room is better because Waller silently quit 2 seasons ago. I think even that tight end room is better. So, to be honest, sitting back and really looking at things with a calm head, I think the team is going to be better this season than it was last season. And to me, what I'm most interested in is the coaching. Can McDaniels inspire the team? And can we get 8 or 9 wins is what I'm hoping for, and I think is very likely. Thanks, Stu. Talk to you later.
Raider Eddie, thanks for the call, my man. I appreciate you. And, yeah, I think 13 starts is definitely the minimum, right? I mentioned that, a week ago, that he's got to start 13 games at least. And really, when I said that, I think Damon, my producer on Raider Nation Radio 920, he said, I think he needs to start at least 15 games, right? I mean, and it's crazy that we're even going into, camp and training camp and all that stuff, and we're talking about how many games he can afford to miss, right? I mean, that just kind of lets you know where everyone's at with Jimmy G and his availability, that we all expect him to miss some games. We're just hoping it's less than 4 or 5 games, right? I think anywhere from 13 to 15 games is definitely what Jimmy G needs to start. But again, there's got to be a start, right? Who knows when that start's going to be? Hopefully he's ready to go for training camp. I think that's really important. It's a question that I actually asked Kirk Morrison over the weekend when I was doing that radio show with him. And he said, man, he's got to be there for training camp day one. He's like, I know that he knows Josh McDaniels' system, and I know that at some point he'll be able to just kind of slide back into it and figure it out. It's like getting on a bike again, but he thinks that he really needs to be there for training camp for day one. And so that's a former player. He knows better than I do. So we'll see. But, I don't know. I think Jimmy G just needs to be out there throughout the course of the 2023 season for the Raiders to have a chance, right? The defense has got to make plays, like I mentioned in segment number 2. But if the Raiders want to have a chance to win games, it's going to be with Jimmy G under center, not Brian Hoyer, not Aiden O'Connell, but Jimmy G. Thank you so much for that. I do appreciate you, Raider. Eddie, finally, we'll close out with a text from JV Raider in Georgia. Said, what's up, Q? It's JV Raider from Georgia. Let me get straight to the point. Am I surprised Josh McDaniels tap danced around the Jimmy G questions? Absolutely not. The smirk on his face while he thinks he's outsmarting the reporters in these pressers, such as yourself, is really starting to irritate me. Just answer the damn question, Josh. We as fans deserve better than this. This is the same coach that couldn't hack it in Denver. Gets another head coaching chance and blew several double-digit leads last year. He benches Carr and tap dances around that and just says he wants a good look at Stidham. Then ships both Carr and Stidham off to other teams. We signed Garoppolo, and there's a delayed presser, which he tap dances around the delay. Now this foot surgery stuff, and he's tap dancing again. I'm so sick of this new regime. I've been a Raider fan for over 2 decades, and I've never felt so unhappy with this team heading into a season. I'm not even excited, Q, and I'm very sad about that. I know I'm not the only fan that feels that way. The only thing this guy has proven is he's nothing without Bill Belichick and Tom Brady. All the blown leads and tap dancing so far as the Raiders head coach tells me he's just trying to fake it till he makes it. Well, Q, I don't think he'll ever make it. Hopefully he proves me wrong, but I'm not optimistic at all. Talk me off the Raiders ledge, Q. I'm about to jump ship till he's gone. JV Raider out from Georgia. Thank you for the text, my man. And I'm not going to talk you off the ledge because it's June 5th. I don't think you should be on a ledge in June. Right? I mean, there's obviously things to be concerned about. You brought up some really good points. There's stuff to be concerned about for sure. But one, when Jimmy G's presser got delayed, Josh McDaniels didn't come out and say anything, right? The Raiders PR department all sent us a text. They didn't even come down to the media room and say, hey, you guys all go home. Sent us all texts and said, yeah, we're going to delay this till tomorrow. So that was them. We didn't hear from head coach Josh McDaniels at all. We didn't hear from GM Dave Ziegler at all, right? We didn't hear any of that. He didn't ship off Jarrett Stidham to Denver. Jarrett Stidham agreed to a free agent deal with Denver for 2 years, $10 million, right? And he actually agreed to that deal before the Raiders even came to agreement with Jimmy G. Now, the whole Jimmy G stuff, we've talked about it in great length. Of course, that's very concerning, right? I mean, you obviously know that he needs to be out there and be ready to go. And there's questions about Josh McDaniels as a head coach. You're absolutely right about that. He's got to prove that he could be a really good head coach. It didn't work out in Denver. He came to the Raiders. He said, okay, I learned a lot from, 10 years ago. So he took a crack at it. Only won 6 games in 2022. Obviously, that's not going to cut it. I don't know what this year is going to look like. I really don't. I think I know a lot depends on the quarterback position and also how much better can that defense be than it was a year ago. Those are going to be obviously the biggest 2 questions as far as the Raiders have going into the season. Who's going to be behind center and how much better is that defense going to be than it was a year ago, or is it going to be better than it was a year ago? But as far as, like I said, being on the ledge right now, don't stress yourself out that much, man. It's only June 5th. Right? Let them get to training camp, maybe get a couple preseason games under the belt before you get stressed out like that where you're on the ledge. I would just kind of relax a little bit. It's going to be a slower time of year right now. And then training camp, when it happens, around August, that's when you can really start getting ramped up and getting fired up. So, I just want to see how it's all put together, really. And so that's where my excitement level comes from, because I know it's a new year. Everyone's got an opportunity. They've just got to go out there and take advantage of that opportunity. So, JV Raider, thanks so much. I do appreciate you. Thanks for chiming in on the show. And please don't let that be your last text to the Locked On Raider podcast voicemail line at 707-654-4693. Again, that's going to do it for today's show. Excited about Raiders Media Day. It gets all started around 7 o'clock this morning. You can check out a lot of it on the Raiders YouTube page, but I'll bring as much of it as I can to the podcast on tomorrow's show. Of course, we'll have more news and notes and plenty of conversation, your calls and texts as well, because that's what we do here on the Locked On Raiders podcast. So until tomorrow, Raider Nation, take care of yourself, take care of your family, love on your family. Most importantly, as always, just win, baby.